Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Find Familiar is a classic spell in D&D and for a lot of good reasons. The main one of which is it gives you your own little fuzzy familiar. And with this familiar, it can be used in a lot of different ways. It can be used to deliver spells with a range of touch, give allies advantage, and even let you see and hear through their senses. And also, normally, there wasn't much else we could do with these features besides what I had previously stated. But now, thanks to the drunken abomination that is D&D's core rules of 2024, Find Familiar got a few massive hidden buffs under the right conditions. So now, let's really talk about some of the issues that Find Familiar had. So right off the bat, early game, that 10 gold's worth of that dank magical koosh is quite a heavy investment. And it hurts to make that walk of shame to go to Incense R Us every time your familiar gets downed. Luckily though, you won't have to anymore. You see, Druids got an update recently with this lovely little second level feature called our Wild Companion. You see, this allows us to cast Find Familiar through either a spell slot as normal or by spending a use of our Wild shape. In addition, we can now cast Find Familiar without spending the incense cost to cast it. No more 10 gold worth of incense anymore. We can now just spam Find Familiar with our spell slots. And I can already hear your rebuttals. But Smiles, casting Find Familiar is still an hour. We can't just spam it with everything, even with the lack of components. True. Very true. But the fun is in the wording of Druid's Wild Companion. You see, we can spend a magic action to cast the spell. This means that casting Find Familiar can be done as a single action. And for those of you keeping track at home, one action in D&D is 6 seconds, which is a lot shorter than 1 hour. Using this, we can now reduce our casting of it to one action, and it doesn't require any of the material components. So, what we'll do from here is obvious, isn't it? Now that we've started Druid, we're going to go over to Warlock. See, that's called the bait and switch. You see, Druid isn't the only class that got a change recently. Warlock had a massive overhaul with their packs and invocations, now becoming one in the same, sort of. So now what we'll want to do with Warlock is make sure we get Pact of the Chain, Investment of the Chainmaster, and the last bit, which is a little kind of dicey, Voice of the Chainmaster. And you see those first two, those technically do exist within the 2024 set of D&D. The Voice of the Chainmaster, that's an ability that didn't necessarily carry over. Based on backwards compatibility rules, there are clauses that say Voice of the Chainmaster is still a valid feature moving forward because it wasn't written out for a new ability. However, there are people that speculate because Voice of the Chainmaster didn't make it into the new player's handbook that it was automatically removed. So just run that by your DM. However, my little tangent aside, by 5th level of Warlock, we can easily make all of these little invocations happen. You see, by 5th level, we'll have 5 invocations that we can pick from, and we'd really only need the 3 that I had discussed to make all of this fun stuff happen. And you see, to get all this started with Pact of the Chain, oh boy, this honestly is where a lot of the fun shenanigans start. You see, with this feature, we can cast Find Familiar as a magic action without expending a spell slot. And now, this might not sound too interesting when we compare it to our Wild Shape Companion feature from Druid, because honestly, it's not. You see, with Chain Pact, we don't have to cast a spell, yes. It's also just an action, also yes, but it does still require the 10 gold worth of incense. And the sad and kind of frustrating part is, based on the syntax of these abilities, in order to have the spell not cost gold, you need to spend a spell slot. But in order to not spend a spell slot, you have to spend the incense in order to cast it. So you have to choose between spamming Find Familiar with incense or spell slots. That's your pick. So inevitably, if you do want to really maximize your chain lock, and you really just want to stick with Pact of the Chain, you can cast Find Familiar as much as you want, but you're going to need a lot of that dank magical koosh in order to keep going and bringing your familiar back out. But now, looking over what we currently have, we're a 7th level character, and we can make this character basically summon spam a ton of familiars on loop. In addition, all these familiars exist as extensions of us using our DC, as well as even being able to make attacks that use our action and bonus action. Because remember, even though we can't spam Find Familiar without a spell slot, we can use our Druid and Warlock spell slots and Wild Shapes to cast Find Familiar without a material component. You see, now that we've also come this far, I'd like to paint some lovely pictures of what we can do with these features, as well as some very honorable mentions. You see, first of all, Flock of Familiars. This is a spell that was released in the Lost Library of Qualish, and what it does is basically create a bunch of other familiars that all act as separate entities to one another. You can see through their senses and cast touch spells through them. It's a concentration spell that lasts for an hour, and the reason I want to put this spell on an honorable mentions list is simply because it's somewhat debated on whether or not it actually synergizes with Chainlock. Some people speculate that Chainlock can let you use this spell to cast additional versions of your Warlock familiars, and even use them to attack as a group. Some say this is too extreme and you can only have one attack per turn. Others say that Chainlock simply creates a normal creature that you would have through a regular Find Familiar spell. In my opinion, I'm a believer of something between options A and B. I think that if you summon the creatures, they do take your normal Warlock forms, or any other forms that you could potentially get from other sorts of features. And if you have something like Investment of the Chainmaster, then you can have only one creature make the attack that turn, and the bonus action attack as well, if once again you have a feature for it. Even splitting them up over 2 different creatures if you want, but not having every creature just going blasting. And now second, Shepherd Druid. Oh man, if I had to mix Chainlock with anything, it would likely be this. You see, Shepherd Druids gain 2 impressive features that synergize with our familiars, surprisingly. Their Mighty Summoner gives us the following features to apply to our familiars. You see, weirdly enough, as long as we choose that our familiar is a Fey creature, designating it as the creature type of Fey, but then having whatever form we decide, you see, the creature then appears with more hit points than normal. 2 extra hit points per hit die that the creature's form has. The damage from its natural weapons is considered magical for the purpose of overcoming immunity and resistance to non-magical attacks and damage. And in addition, at level 10, you also gain the Guardian Spirits. Your spirit totem safeguards the beasts and Fey that you call forth with your magic. When a beast or a Fey that you summoned or created with the spell ends its turn in your spirit totem aura, that creature regains a number of hit points equal to half your druid level. And because our familiars are in fact Fey, they're eligible for this. And now Conjuration Wizard's Capstone, Durable Summons. This feature allows any creature we conjure to have 30 temporary hit points when it's summoned in. Combining this with the fact that we can kind of just spam Find Familiar without material components means we can just popping in a creature with plus 30 temporary hit points round after round after round. And now moving on, Strixhaven Mascot. You see, the best way in my opinion to get this ability is go with one of the Strixhaven backgrounds, and then as soon as you can get yourself this feat. And what the Strixhaven Mascot feat does is it gives you other options for your familiar to take. Some of these I personally think are a lot of fun in comparison to the others. The Fractal Mascot and the Spirit Mascots are some of my personal favorites though. The Fractal Mascot can change its size to huge, which is a lot of fun when you get to fly around on it with Investment of the Chainmaster. And Spirit Statue Mascot gives you the ability to add a 1d4 onto a skill check a couple of times a day, and we all know how much I love doing that kind of stuff here. But also, if we're talking about other forms, let's not forget that Chainlock, especially nowadays, gives you so many new forms that you can give your familiar. For example, now you can make them take the form of an imp, pseudo-dragon, quasit, skeleton, slad tadpole, sphinx of wonder, sprite, or venomous snake. Before it was really just the imp, sprite, quasit, and pseudo-dragon. Now that list is almost doubled. So yeah, it's a good day to be Warlock. And now, speaking of the other forms that our familiars can take, oh boy, this is the really fun part of the video. You see, previously in 2014, Find Familiar basically just gave us a list of like, hey, you can choose one of these like dozen creatures to use. But you see, the thing is, Wizards of the Coast made this horrible mistake of forgetting that I exist. Because they said within the Find Familiar spell that instead of it just being this static list of around 12 or so creatures that they could choose from, now our familiar can be any beast creature of CR 0. And now guess what has a CR of 0? This thing. The Huang-Harask from Waterdeep Dungeon of the Mad Mage. It's a huge snail creature with a pretty amazing shell. When anyone touches it, they can gain 6 temporary hit points, and they gain the benefits of a remove curse spell. So just imagine you and a few of your friends are soaring through the sky on a massive group of magic snails. Trust me when I say that this is a pretty big deal. Before, you were restricted to the Find Familiar choice so much, And now you can basically just make them, for the most part, whatever you want, as long as it fits in with the CR0 Beast thing and some of the other options, like with the Strixhaven mascot and the Warlock and everything. So yeah, of course there are a lot of other really fun features that you can do with the familiar. They gave it a lot of extra flexibility that I do really like. But now also, like, I just think it's cosmically funny that you can just summon this giant snail, and because of investment of the Chainmaster, you can give it a fly speed. So just you and your friends can literally just fly on the back of this thing like Appa from Avatar: The Last Airbender. So yeah, you're welcome. In my humble opinion, I think the best low-level bet for this is to take your 5 levels of Warlock and then your 2 levels of Druid. It's a really fun low-level combo that basically lets you and your friends just, once again, ride giant, magical, aiding, curse-breaking snails. And also, too, if you're not really into that for whatever reason, you also just now have this really great way of just spamming Find Familiar with a very low gold cost and summon your familiar as many times as you want. And even with this, too, using these features, you'll very rarely find yourself not having your familiar by your side to help fight your battles. So yeah, just keep all that in mind. But anyways, that is all the time I have for today. If you enjoyed this video, then please like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know down in the comments what your favorite Find Familiar stories are and what you'll be doing with all of this crazy stuff within your games. Until I see you again, keep smiling, keep scheming, and I'll see all of you next time.